all of you, and thank you for joining us on this LinkedIn Live session on a topic that I know is near and dear to lots of our hearts, which is around building trust in artificial intelligence. Now, I have the pleasure of being your host, your moderator, as well as one of the panelists, and wearing three different hats here today. I'm Chirag Joshi, uh, and I wear many hats in my day job, but I'm the co-founder of Boostify Cyber, who's hosting this session today. But I'm also the chief AI officer for Critical Front, and I run Seven Rules Cyber as the chief executive and lead advisor. Now, in all those different hats, I have the privilege of working with many organizations here in Australia and globally. And the one thing that always comes across is a big focus on AI. But I think we as a community, and I'll introduce my fellow speakers very shortly, but I just want to open with the fact that this is not a session that is going to tell us AI is coming, AI is important, AI is going to help our business. I think those are all a given. It's here, it's now, and we are all in many ways using it in our day-to-day lives. In fact, for most of us in the technology world, it's become as ubiquitous as using the internet. There was a day, I think, we don't want to give our ages away, but I do remember a time when you didn't necessarily turn on a computer and have the internet. You had to actually go on the internet and actually log on to something to actually be connected. And now we just get on a computer and you expect internet to be there. Otherwise, what's the point? I feel that's how now AI has become, is what's the point if it's not there? So that's where we are. But the real challenge that we face today is the adoption, the interest, the experimentation has far exceeded our ability to govern it responsibly and building trust in it. So that's the first point I want to bring up. Now, with that in mind, the key bit that we want to cover today in our session is going to be around just talking a bit about the National AI Plan. That to me was a founding document of sorts that brought together us as Australians in terms of what we are going to do to approach this massive opportunity, as well as a risk if we don't handle it well. But after we do that, we actually want to move into some of the more practical implications of what does that really mean to us in our organizations? How do we build trust in it? So before I do that, I want to introduce and bring on my fellow speakers who are going to join me. They'll have a quick introduction, and then we'll get into the heart of the matter. So with that, I'll go next to my co-founder, my friend, and long-term associate, Branko.
Yeah, thanks, Chirag. It's good to be here with everyone here on the call today. I think it's quite an important topic today, trust, safety, and responsibility, especially in the wake of how these models are rapidly evolving. So for those that don't know me, my background is largely being as the founder of a company called Dragonfly Technologies, which I exited in 2024. I've since gone on to co-found Critical Front with Chirag, along with Boostify Cyber, and very much now on that sort of precipice of, treating it at from my view of it, from the human aspect through to how we secure our world to how we implement and use AI to further take that. So it's like a natural progression. And unfortunately, Chirag said earlier about our ages and my age, I think we're kind of really very fortunate to be seeing a lot of this unfold very quickly and rapidly, from cassette tapes from the 80s right through to solid state drives and things like that are evolving in the computer. Now it's all cloud, so we don't even talk about hardware much anymore anyway. But yes, today's call is all about AI. Very excited to be here and share my experiences, and I look forward to, please, if there's a way to put your questions into the chat there, and we'll look forward to answering them. Thank you.
Thanks, Branko. And I want to next go to Mick. And just for our audience, look, I think I've always enjoyed interacting with Mick. I mean, while he's going to talk about his organization, what he does, but he's been a massive supporter of what we do at Boostify and bringing education and insights to the wider community. So thank you for that, Mick, and over to you for an introduction.
Thank you very much, Chirag. Branko, I've forgotten what a cassette tape is. I don't know.
I'm not punch card time, so yeah.
And downloading games and that kind of thing. And I do remember the days when the internet wasn't a default, but you're absolutely right, it's a default now. So I'm 10 years at Trend AI. previously Trend Micro, but we're rebranding around that because that's really core to what we do. So I can talk a bit about that, but really, I've got 20-year history in security, and I think I'm delighted to be joined by Branko and Chirag, two industry experts here. I'm throughout this session this morning, I'm hoping I can share some of the challenges I'm seeing on the ground from a security perspective, and some of the things that I'm hearing and understanding from customers around some of the pain points that we see from a cyber point of view. So that's about the risk, the containment of that risk, and understanding. Going back to governance, right? How do we trust what we're doing here with AI, and how do we make sure that we're getting the outcome that the business needs? I think that's really essential to kind of talk about too. So really looking forward to today, and fantastic to be joined by Chirag and Branko in doing that. Brilliant.
Awesome. Let's get started, guys. So so for our audience, some of you may recollect that we've done a session on the AI plan as a dedicated segment, and we did that in December when the plan was launched. So I encourage you to go and check it out when we talk about the plan, but insights. But I do think it's useful, it's with time how quickly it flies. It's already been a few months since the plan was launched. So I think it's probably worthwhile reorienting with what it was real quick. And then we can get into some of the more practical implications of how fast things are moving in this space. So with that, allow me to bring up just a couple of slides. I promise this is not going to be dead by PowerPoint. This is more about our discussions as opposed to just reading up slides. But if you are not familiar, and I know we tend to have a global audience as well, not just an Australian audience. So I want to bring this up in that context. So we in Australia launched our national AI plan in December last year. And there were some really good things that came out of it. A lot of anticipation, a lot of expectations then went into what this plan was going to tackle. And with anything of this nature, you can't make everybody happy. But I do think, in my opinion, it set the foundation nicely for where we are as a nation here in Australia with what we want to do with AI. So there were three key goals at a high level that the National AI Plan sets out to achieve. The first goal is capturing the opportunity, right? So not just thinking about it from just a risk standpoint without mistaking the opportunity aspect of it, right? So I think that's really key. So opportunity comes out at the first one. The second one was when you have the benefits that gets realized from these opportunities, those are spread amongst the community. So it's not just concentrated in a few pockets, but we as a society benefit from it. And then finally, it's about keeping Australians safe as they leverage AI, but also as they are impacted by AI. So there was those three high-level goals. Now those goals translated into specific actions. And you'll see 9 actions here on the screen. And they roughly align to the first 3, aligning with the first goal, the second 3 with the second goal, and so forth. But the first few, as you will see, were all about our capacity as a nation. So building the smart infrastructure, the compute power, our capability, the data centers that allow us not just to be a passive consumer of this transformational technology, but rather having a capacity to build that and punch above our weight in that area. But you need to attract investment to do so. Like, you can't just do this by yourself, and which is why that becomes one of the key actions that has been put in. And there is a fair bit of content that you'll see in the source link there. You can go up and look at the details. But at a high level, that's what we are trying to achieve. The next 3 are about how do you scale, support Australians, and improve public services. So there is a separate artifact that is specifically around Australian public service and use of AI in that area, right? So the idea is, you do it well as a government, you adopt it responsibly, and that allows you to be more effective when you actually reach out to the citizens. But AI adoption and supporting and training Australians is such a key part, right? At all different levels, we all need to be upskilled on this technology. I mean, it almost doesn't matter how long have you been in the industry or how much work you've done. We all can learn, and we all need to learn because we are dealing with something new, and we are dealing with something that is moving really fast. So that's another part of the National AI Plan. And then finally, the last 3 are the ones that I imagine we'll be talking a fair bit about today, is how do we mitigate the harms that could potentially come with And then how do we promote responsible practices and partner on global norms? Now, for us in Australia, and the AI plan actually talks about it, there are special considerations given to our First Nations people and the sensitivities around those areas that we be mindful of as we roll this out responsibility, the data we hold, data we manage, and keeping track of that. But also the impact, the disproportionate impact that this might have on some sections of society, especially if you think about the gender thing, and the AI plan talks about that too. So we got to be mindful of it. The one thing I emphasize, and I get this question a lot, so I might just bring that up, is the plan did not necessarily introduce new regulations, right? That was not the intent of the plan. It does draw out, there are many regulations that currently are in place that can be leveraged to regulate AI too. And that's something really important for the boards. So so that's in fact, I was at the largest gathering of company directors in Australia, which was hosted and managed as part of the AICD's national conference. And I tell you, that's a company directors forum, right? That's a forum of the chairs and the NEDs of most of the major organizations here in Australia. And for that group, AI was the predominant theme in the discussion. So you see that is already resonating, and that's already resonating with what the regulators are doing there. So I don't think there was a necessary desire to create a new regulatory regime, but rather leverage what's already there. And I know the privacy commissioner's been quite open and transparent about what she's expecting from AI use there. And then the one thing which I'll say from an AI plan standpoint was establishment of the AI Safety Institute for us as a nation. And I think that's going to be a key pillar in terms of driving the responsible practices in AI. Since the plan was launched, a few things have happened already, as you'd imagine, like 4 to 5 months in the AI world, it can be a lifetime. So we've seen Anthropic do an MOU with the student government on certain areas. We've also seen, in terms of the National AI Center and the guidance they've been putting out there, that's starting to get some traction. And we will also today share with you later on, and stick with us, the 8 core pillars, because I always like to bring things down to digestible pieces. So what are the 8 things that we need to be mindful of and the pillars that will drive governance? We'll come to that later. And before I jump off and give the mic to my fellow guests here, there is one slide which which I also talked about, and I think is worth recapping, is the real implications of those. And if I had to recap them back here, they would be that AI oversight is now a board level competency, right? Leaders are accountable for that. It's not just good enough to say we have some principles and we have human in the loop. That's not good enough to say. I think there is an expectation now is what's the evidence? And what the boards need to be aware of is if you were to be challenged by a regulator, by a customer, by the media on how an AI made decision impacted someone, can you reasonably draw back the decisions that were made internally, the checks and challenges you had, the evidence that you collected, to be conscious and responsible with the AI rollout in the organizations that you govern? So that's the first one. The second one is transparency and testing have become expectations. And the National AI Plan talks about that too. It's not good practice anymore, it's expected organizational behavior. So this again comes back to the fact that not everything can be explained, in terms of a model. And I get that. I'm not going to argue the pros and cons of that, but we definitely can be transparent about how we are using AI as it relates to decisions that we make. So I think there are levels of transparency. And my view is it's not an optional, it's an expected behavior. And then lastly, as I mentioned, things with the First Nations people, the workforce, the work health and safety, they are squarely in scope. This is not just about cybersecurity or just about data sovereignty. It's about all of this. It's about the regime of fairness, well-being, autonomy for us as humans. And Branko brought that up earlier, the human aspect. And that's an often forgotten story, but a real important story, and not just as a nice to have, but is already called out in how we are looking at it in Australia. So with that, I'm going to pause. I'm going to go to my friend Mick first to get his reaction and observations on the National AI Plan, and then we'll tackle some of the more practical bits.
Thanks, Chirag. So just looking at those real implications in the national plan there, from what I'm seeing on the ground, in talking with customers every day around the challenges, is a number of layers, if you like, of things. The first one that is usually a conversation, and I come from this from a security point of view. So, you know, in that sense, it's usually around visibility, but that visibility is the depth of the visibility that people need. I think there is the move to AI. People say the move to AI was a bit like the move to cloud. I think the move to cloud was developers finding that cloud was an easier place to, generate an application that was in an easy way. I think the thing about AI and general AI usage is it's not just developers, it's everybody, right? So we're using the tools. I think the main issue that concerns organizations is the use of those tools. And whilst most people have policies, they have limited ways to govern those policies. So in terms of governance and transparency about how AI is being used in your organization, actually getting a handle on that on an individual, employee or user basis can be a challenge. That's one of the things. And with that visibility, it's not just whether somebody's gone to the OpenAI site and used it for something. What did they use it for? What data was uploaded? What's the risk to my organization around that? And what visibility do I have there? So that's one side of it. I think the other side of it that I see is that there's this need within organizations to understand AI in the context of what they do every day for their customers or their users or the services they provide. And that is an area in which there's a lot of discovery going on. And that discovery is aimed really at finding the use cases that work. And what I'm understanding from successful parts of that is that, a well-defined use case with an ROI or a benefit to the business that's well discussed and well understood leads you a long way down a path for using AI in your production environment or in your real environment. There's a lot of experimentation going on. And then I guess the third element that I see is where I am generating AI models or using AI models to do or help in these environments, how am I consistently and constantly testing those models for bias, for whether they can be compromised in any way, whether the data models are getting poisoned or how the data's moving in and out of those AI models. Some of these concerns are very similar. And going back to that point about we probably don't need new regulations because we have quite a lot of regulations and governance, but the challenge of data security is the same. It's just we've got AI models and we've got an expanded attack surface. The challenge of keeping infrastructure and compute safe from attack is the same, even though it's AI infrastructure and models. So I just share that. That's some of the things that I'm seeing, and I think that really relates in that third bit around the governance, oversight, and taking responsibility for what's going on in a responsible way.
Yeah. No, thanks for that, Mick. And look, I think those are really good points. And I think everything to your point there starts with visibility, as what you're saying. And I do agree, because one of the first questions that the boards need to be mindful of, and this comes up, is do you have line of sight into the use cases in your organization for artificial intelligence? And to answer that question, it almost starts with that parallel analogy that you brought up in the cybersecurity or data security world that we have, is what are your assets, right? What do you actually have to even be able to protect them? And the same applies, is do we have line of sight into the different AI use cases for them to then start defining at that materiality threshold? So that observability, that visibility, I call it that AI inventory. I think that's the heart of it, because if you don't have that, you almost don't have a starting position. So establishing an AI inventory is an absolute essential as far as I'm concerned. Now, there are ways to do it, as you said, Mick, that are a bit easier than starting with a spreadsheet. If you have nothing, you start with that. But I mean, that becomes really hard and unwieldy to manage long term. So with that, I want to next to Branko, I just want to go to you. And maybe, Branko and I, as a lot of you know, we are co-founders of Critical Front as well. And Critical Front, our focus has been on responsible AI governance. Branko, let me ask you this question, right? And this is a practical question with all the discussions you've been having with the different senior leaders and board members. Is what do you reckon is that one specific control that you might want to talk about, that or that piece of evidence that tells you that this organization is actually walking the talk when it comes to governing AI responsibly, right? So let's just be real about this. Like, everybody says, yeah, we got to govern AI. What's the one thing that you notice that sets aside the ones with actually doing it and the ones that are talking about it?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. I think it's how do employees and customers, how are they assured that, I guess, in the enterprise sense, how are they implementing and ensuring that trust, and there's trust and AI safety around that. And it's like, I mean, there's lots of parallels to cybersecurity in all of this, and I think that's why we find ourselves naturally transitioning into this field, along with it having a great impact on what we're doing as a profession as well, like many others in legal and healthcare and finance and insurance. But I think there are going to be signals and policies and controls that are largely internal, but there's also other things that are external that the organizations can do to show their approach towards responsible AI and trust and safety. And I think the first and foremost, and again, this comes down to that cybersecurity kind of drawing the bow to that is it's around that AI governance is a formal and enforced process. I guess again, pretty much like that. There's the documentation, there's the oversight committee, there's the review process, risk evaluation. That whole ecosystem exists, and that should be working and functioning very much like it has been in those well-run cybersecurity industries that are facing those threats as well. But I think the key thing with these models as they're learning, and Mick touched on this earlier, is that even the researchers can't really predict the intention of these models and what they're going to do and the outcomes of those models. And Anthropic is big on this, and they went first to market and being unique around this and saying, hey, we're going to put safety and responsible AI first. And they came up with this notion of the constitutional AI, where they fed in things like the United Nations regulations and Apple terms and conditions to try and feed the model to kind of influence it to go down a path which it's more responsible and not harmless, and less to degree creating information or a dialogue that's not conducive of what an organization needs. And so I think even the Anthropic case, the co-founder there is also stressing that you can't let AI run amok on these systems and in your environment. There are tasks where AI can completely, and the different models within AI and the different providers that AI can run quite autonomously. But the key thing there is having that human oversight remaining as a mandatory component inside that organization. So I think that's very important, to make sure that there is human oversight, especially in those those high stake decisions, and then employees are trained and the fact that hallucinations is going to occur. They are not going to be rid of these hallucinations. And they also admit, as they being the AI providers, admit that something that they don't even have a time frame for, or a timeline, or if it's possible to remove that. So again, that brings back the importance of having that human oversight at that level of those high stake critical sort of environments. And Anthropic also talks about, and I don't want to talk so much about Anthropic, there are other models out there, but they also talk about what does it do, where are the lines drawn around, like advancement of chemical weapons and things like that, and they try to rule those things out. But more, if I bring it back to the enterprise sense, I think the other kind of point is obviously data. And you mentioned Chirag, the Data Privacy Commissioner, is very much interested in this, because we are handling data. The AI models are feeding data. They are user data. Our users want to know what kind of data is being fed on into their models, what it's been trained on those. And for an organization to show that they're truly real about this, is they need to really show that they're transparent and being protective about that data in the environment that they're working in within that. And look, and finally, like everything, I think the fourth thing that I'd like to see is that it's measured and obviously reported internally. So there's kind of fundamentals there, establishing that governance framework across the top, being true to the fact that, hey, AI is really helping us augment, our workforces and advance and learn new things, but we still have to remain centric to that. As I said, to point out, Chirag, I'm very human focused, but I also want to take yourselves to these technologies as tools to implement and to improve lives and to, do those Monday tasks so we can get back and do more creative and more thoughtful work. And then there's that kind of bow to make sure that, it's continually changing. How are we keeping abreast of this? What are our risk exposures? How are we are we on course? Are we potentially at risk? All those sorts of things, which those that come from the background of risk or background of being in cyber will completely understand and realize that it's not an easy problem to solve. And as someone pointed out on the chat, you can have these documents and these strategies, but the rubber hits the road when you're really starting to work with your users, talk to your customers, show real outcome, real value, aligning the use cases with the right models to get basically the best outcomes, I think. So probably a long response, Chirag, but I think, it's kind of like where
I think it's useful. Yeah, no, it's a good well-rounded consideration, Branko, as always. And I see a comment coming from one of our live stream viewers, Marita saying, trust in AI won't come from strategy document, it comes from defined limits, visible accountably. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point. And I encourage our listeners to share their thoughts. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be, your thoughts like this
Absolutely.
as well.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to come back to you, Mick, now. And Mick,
no, you go.
Go for it, Mick. Go for it. You want to say something?
Well, I guess coming from Branko's comment there and what Marita's just said in the chat, we do have this issue around providing a safe environment in which we can develop our AI capability, right? And that comes a bit around the risk associated with what you're doing in AI and whether you've got a handle on those risks and you understand, and you've got, I come back to visibility partly, but part of the trend AI has a tagline called AI fearlessly, and people go, oh, what's that about? And the idea is that, but with the right, you see, with the right controls, the right visibility, the right environment in which to develop and understand your AI, AI projects, you can actually fearlessly go into this world in AI because you can feel that you've got the governance, you've got the controls, you've got the visibility, and that's very much the way trend is focused at the moment, providing an environment and the tooling and the capability to understand what models are running, what AI is running, what the controls on that AI are, how you can test that AI for consistent results and make sure that, that you're red teaming your AI models for vulnerabilities and this kind of thing. So providing, if you like, a security layer around that AI environment. And that's all I was going to say, because off the back of what Branko said,
that's very important. That's a very important point, Mick, because it's up to companies. It's not up to the AI providers, the OpenAI and Anthropic. They're going to do their research. They're going to, even their own researchers can't know what intent. I said that earlier. They're just waiting to see, and it's kind of evolving and developing. So no one can predict what the next AI model is going to look like. So, and they openly themselves say it's up to the downstream providers that are going to take on these models to actually implement those controls around safety and control and responsibility. And one of the things that sticks with me is in a conversation with one of the Anthropic team was they say that safety, we're treating safety as a safety issue and people are moving away from it. But actually the safety component is actually a business decision. And why that resonated with me was because it comes back again and again and again, that everything we find ourselves here not because of its X or Y, it's because it's a business decision has led us down here. A business decision will say whether we allow the model to be, rogue, or whether we allow it to be offensive, whether we allow it to be, and of course Anthropic and all that have, controls and guidelines. Some models are not doing so much in that space. So then it comes a business decision as to how you consume and use that model, and then how you take the benefit and value out of that model to, for the intent of the AI use case, for example. So it's very important.
And customizing, what Anthropic do with their guardrails is fine. That's what Anthropic do. But then for your specific business application that you're running with your specified, hopefully people are going to move not from large language models, but to small, defined small language models that are doing this specific task that you're trying to achieve that's related to the business benefit and the ROI. And that will have its own customized guardrails that are all about your context, your data, your usage. And to go back to Marita's point, that's where you're putting in the stop points. That's where you're not letting it go rogue, because you've actually defined that model in a more coherent way. And that actually leads to this point around hallucinations. I think if you start to control the breadth of the model around a specific task, you can start to narrow down the broader interpretation, and I think that can be useful too. So I think we'll see lots of evolution. I suppose that's a kind of a mixed view about where that might go. But AI is moving so fast. It could go in other directions too. But you'll always need. I suppose my further point there is you'll always need customized guardrails for your business application and your context.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think this is again, at the risk of kind of overusing that, but that analogy persisted. We have these frameworks. We've had frameworks in the cyber world, which were, NIST cybersecurity framework or ISO's 27001. We always had to, tailor them for our organizations, right? We couldn't just take what's there and just apply, because that doesn't work. And the same thing goes for AI. Like if you think about the AI frameworks, such as the ISO 42001 or the NIST AI risk management framework, like the same thing is you need to contextualize to what matters to you, which means you need to understand what is it for you as a business that matters. One question I have for you, Mick, and then I want to get in the last part of our conversation around the 8 pillars that I teased up, because hold on, guys, that's going to be worth it, because that's actually advised to get it in a more actionable format. So, Mick, one question I have, since you mentioned a fair number of things around, the observability bit, where you see the practical guardrails and obviously what trends been doing in this area, let me ask you one question, right? So what is the one thing that organizations believe they have had as an AI control, but they don't really have it? What do you think that could be, in your experience?
I think they believe that they've got they all have a policy in place, and I think there's this kind of belief that if the data is sovereign and I know what model you're putting into, we're kind of safe. What's missing, what tends to be missing from that conversation, again, is the context of what's coming in and out of the model. So what prompts my users putting in, what data are they putting in, what are they getting back, and do I have a depth of visibility on that? That's one element. I suppose the other element is the supply chain, right? Your supply chain of services and SaaS-based software that you're using today, and its view of your data and how your supply chain or your suppliers are using AI. I think this is an area in which we as a service supplier are getting questioned more and more on. I think this is that's part of the whole supply chain debate we've been having for the last few years about in cybersecurity, but I think it's an extended view of that. So it's probably a couple of things, but I think that's the one thing that the policy's in place and we've defined the model you can use and we think it's on-prem, but knowing whether that policy is truly governed or not, that's the one thing.
That's a great point, Mick. I think that's the false sense of complacency. And that's what I find, right? Like, I think most organizations that we deal with have an AI policy of some sorts. And even to your point, I think you've gone one step further and said that even if you have a policy and you think you have a sovereign kind of on-premise model, you're okay. And you're really not. And I think this is where it comes down to proper risk management. And this is where my original point is more and more we are going to be challenged, and boards, and I'm thinking about it as a board director myself, is we'll be challenged on what were the checks and balances that you had in place to validate that your policies were actually being implemented, right? And not just good words on a page or some things that were thought of as reasonable practice. So that's going to be really interesting. Branko, I think we're at a good point now. If you want to bring up our
sure.
8 pillars,
share.
I want to spend some time talking about the 8 pillars as a group together. because to me this is a best way to, at this point, to operationalize some of the governance guardrails into more practical sense.
Yeah, let me just bring up the presentation.
All right. So while you do that, Branko, look, I think the main bit which I want to talk about here with this 8 pillars is there are aspects of like what we call as 8 pillars. There is some stuff from the National AI Center which are on essentials, and they have 6 of those where we believe we've gone and added some more context or broken down some categories into more ways where we thought there'd be heightened attention based on the conversations we are having. And the one thing which we haven't talked about as much here is accountable owners, right? I think that's an important part for any board to set in place is who's the accountable executive for use cases. And that's a hard one where you might have a system with multiple use cases. And for each use case, you want that aspect. So I will bring this up now, Brian.
So you can see that, right?
Yes, it shows up here. So
Yeah.
if you wanna, okay, maybe I'll hand over to you, Branko. Why don't you just start? I see the first 4 on here on the screen.
Yeah, so
and
we've
then
got 4 on us. There's a total of 8 down here. And apologies, I don't want to kind of expand the screen because I don't want to lose you guys. But these are the 8 pillars that Chirag talks to. Chirag, do you want to go? Sorry, do you want to go through these?
I will go through these and then I want to open it up to a conversation, right? So the 8 pillars, real quick, and we'll have a lot more on this on the critical front website, by the way. So each of these deserve, as you would imagine, a paper in its own right. But the first pillar is risk management, right? So that's what we've been talking about the whole time here. But the key bit is what's the AI in use and why, what data it touches, and what decision it influences, right? So that's really important. What's the decision being made on the back of it? There are lots of cases right now that I'm seeing, and I'm keen to, and I'll go to make at some point, and I want to get some real life stories. But I see that all the time in many sectors right now. A big use case being around things that can be automatically observed. So be it like maintenance equipment, be it like your telecommunications and other aspects where there is a standardized way of monitoring for anomalies and then doing something about it, right? And that becomes a classic case for AI to step in because predictable patterns, you take that and you do something with it. But a decision that can be influenced on that has a different context depending on what's being done. It's one thing if it's for an organization that is monitoring certain nice to have systems, but if it's critical infrastructure, fundamentally different level of risk, and the level of exposure it creates comes back to that aspect. The next guardrail, or the next category of guardrail here, is testing and validation. So we've talked about that, but the problem that we still see, and this is why I like mixed examples so much, was that is an example of the validation being missed here. Is far too often people are, in the real sense, validating AI for not real operating conditions, but more the safe demo environments. That's where unfortunately the testing and validation is happening, unlike the mass rollouts, because when you actually roll it out and when you have a large customer base or large user base who are going to use or get impacted by it, you need to be testing it under different variable conditions. So that robustness, that bias, and that drift. So if you're not familiar with the concept of drift, is any good model over a period of time can deteriorate based on the interactions that it has with different data sets, and you want to re-anchor it back to what the original intent was or change it to what it has learned along the way. So that drift aspect is not just before deployment, but it's actually significantly important after deployment. The next one is around transparency and contestability. So this is where the conversations were going earlier, is even if we can't explain how every model makes a certain decision, we can be very clear on when AI is involved, what role it played in that decision, and how the affected people can, and that's important, is how can somebody challenge that? If I am impacted as somebody who was trying to either apply for a job or suddenly has a question around how my performance is going, or I can't get access to certain services, I need to be able to challenge that. You can't just tell me, well, the AI made that decision, right? Like that's not going to fly. So what's the mechanism to contest that decision? And it becomes even more important as the stakes get higher. The next one is accountability and governance, right? So this is what I mean is one of the foundational problems right now in many organizations is the AI operating model is still undefined. It's sitting somewhere between the CIO, the chief data officer, the chief information security officer, a hybrid of those. It doesn't necessarily have clear decision rights. And it's not straightforward, primarily because it cuts across so many different domains. It's an interdisciplinary issue, right? Privacy, security, HR, they all have a seat at the table. Risk, compliance, work health, safety. But what's the named ownership? And that's what I came back to as a simple point. If you were to start with an example for a use case, who's the owner of that use case? The business owner, the executive sponsor. And then it becomes easier. Then the last four, I'll go them quickly, and then I want to go back to Mick for your insights. Mick, data security, privacy. Look, this is as bread and butter to us as possible. But to Mick's point earlier is for data security and privacy, think about AI as three different connected interfaces, right? One is the input, which is the data. The next is a model, which sits on some infrastructure, right? It's not sitting magically anywhere. Either it's in the cloud or your premise. It's sitting somewhere, right? It's exposed to the same challenges. And then finally, the outputs, what comes out as a result of it. So the access pathways, the strong privacy security controls are a key part of it. Human oversight. Everybody talks about human in the loop, but how do we track that? How do we evidence this is the biggest problem, right? Is what were the thresholds that were defined to even drive this behavior? And the user training. This goes back to the national AI plan. It's not just users, it's end users, but it's people who review designs, leaders who need to make decision rights. They all need to understand what their roles and responsibilities are and have that training set up, a mechanism. And then finally, stakeholder engagement. So far too often in the change management world, it becomes unfortunately a case where it shouldn't be, but people are consulted and informed and engaged after the fact of a design decision has been made and when it impacts them. I actually encourage people to turn it around when it comes to AI, is engage them early, because they need to be part of the design decision and not a consumer of your decision. So that's how you bake in real world consequence and expectations. So I've done a super quick view of this, but I'm going to go to you, Mick, first.
Before you do, Chirag, sorry, before you do, because there's
Yes.
a few questions in the chat that are appearing. Only conscious of time, so we can get to the nuts and bolts of.
All right, so let me do some questions then. Maybe
as our adoption grows.
Yeah, let me go to the question from Shubham, and I'm going to bring it up on the screen on the stream for everyone to see. So, and I'll get Mick to comment on it. So Shubham's question is, as AI adoption grows, is there value in considering whether Australia should introduce targeted enforcement measures like financial penalties or continue to rely on existing laws? What are your thoughts, Mick?
I think the consensus so far has been, let's not try to introduce new laws specifically around AI, because it's just a new phase and evolution of an IT industry that we're already dealing with. My view would be, I wouldn't want to complicate it just around AI per se. I think in terms of financial penalties that we have for cybersecurity today, there was probably enough debate around those to get those settled. I think financial penalties do have the effect of they give something teeth, right? It means that people pay attention. And if there are consequences for a board, it means they do have to take responsibility. But my view would be that we probably, for kind of data and privacy and the things that can go wrong, we probably have that in place. Where AI's made a decision that has a legal consequence, and this is something I was going to talk about, Chirag, was, well, we're probably going to have to go into depth forensically on why that AI model made that decision, prove it to a court, have it dealt with in the normal legal way, and then if there's financial or legal results from that, then let the court decide that. I don't know whether we need a new law specifically around AI, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, look, it's a good point, Mick. I mean, there are mechanisms, and there is, yes, definitely room for there. But yeah, laws by itself, I mean, I think we are dealing with a pretty stringent regulatory regime in many areas anyway. And I think there is that productivity versus compliance cost, which is always something for a business standpoint. All right, the next question I wanna bring to maybe Branko. You can tackle this first, and then happy for me and Mick to take a stab at it. So this is from Citizen. And the question, oh yes, we know him. And the question is, how can Australia build public trust in AI when the national AI plan promises safety, transparency, and accountability, but the practical mechanisms for enforcing these promises remain unclear? So it's the gap between policy ambition and the reality.
Welcome to the
Tough
real
one.
world, right? Like it's like so many strategies get written, rewritten, and you have one group of policymakers come in and override it with another set. It's going to be interesting to watch. And Mick pointed out we had lots of difficulty in CyberSense, and we watched that unfold painfully. And it's the carrot and the stick sort of approach. I don't really have a good answer to how we can do that, because we've not proven that we can do it. And largely everything's reactive. So unfortunately, there's all these negative or impactful things have occurred before things change. And how do we kind of feed that back in? The economics of even, supporting that. I find it very difficult. I don't have a very good answer. Sure, I preferred the earlier one, but I think, if I slightly digress and kind of draw some parallels, and again, I'll touch back on Anthropic because they're very heavily in what we do, is that, they've looked at the whole social media, because we have some like references to how that came about. And they've seen it. And the first thing they'll, and look, like, I think there's a dark net or dark cloud thrown over social media to the point where I even forget that at some point it actually done a lot of good. And it did a lot of good. A lot of business made a lot of money through social media, and LinkedIn, we're on social media right now. So there is a lot of good elements to social media, but there's also what's involved out of that. What we've learned is the negative. And so our government kind of, they never really had a social media strategy per se, or, how do we, put together something that social media influences and that behave in certain ways. I've largely let that kind of happen organically and go through the motions like a free market would. And then, now we have the bad elements. Roadblock just recently introducing controls. We have the under 16-year-old age ban in Australia, and the British just came out 2 days ago saying they've got a report now that's showing it's not effective. We could have said that, and it's always been the challenge. So, like, these things are very hard to come by, and this is why it's very important that everyone here on this call and everyone that's involved in working in this industry, we look at what are those safety measures. We look at the back of rearview mirror as what didn't work. And even from the side perspective, I didn't want to say NIST, CSF, or ISO 7001 because they've conjured up so much negativity. But how do we take what we can learn from that and implement that going forward to support the AI Institute and things like that, to kind of build that Australian capability? We can go into another kind of, rant, but Australia is also lagging in our AI, research and adoption of AI. We have had something. Yes, there was the co-founders were here in Australia recently signing that, but it's moving at a very slow pace in terms of how the rest of the world is moving. So yeah, long-winded response, but I don't think I've got a good answer for it.
I think there were some good points in that question, though, and I feel like I think there is some things. Look, with these things, right? I do think there are some tangible steps being taken. And again, I'm not saying they're going to solve all the problems, but I think the establishment of national or the AI Safety Institute is a good step forward, because that brings in a mechanism to translate some of these things into operational reality. So, and I feel it's almost like we have learned some good lessons from the social media aspect, where we were too late to the game. And all these age restrictions, while I don't think they're bad things, but they came in a much later than they harm. And I feel with AI, we're actually trying to do this sooner, which is why with some of the chatbots that take on all these personas, some platforms are now banning them for under 18s, right? So I think we've kind of learned from it, but I don't think a heavy-handed way necessarily, where it's just going to come top down, will solve this. I think it's going to take all of us to a degree to contribute to it. But Mick, you have the last word on this.
I think introducing new laws is always going to be tricky and hard in the long road. I think having a very reactive legal system on this, so the AI safety stuff, really good, and then having that backed up by, if you like, prioritized legal assessment of things that go wrong. So that in the case of that unfortunate incident of the chatbot and the teenage suicide in the US, very unfortunate. It's gone to court. I think that's a good thing. I think people will then take accountability and responsibility, and perhaps the system will respond in that way. through protection. And I think that's a really good protective measure. It would be hard to draw up what the law would be today to say, hey, there's harm happened, etc. Let's just be more responsive. Let's just, move quicker in response to what we're seeing.
That's well said, Mick. And look, I love the fact that our audience are also engaging in a chat and having the discussion amongst the points that they're raising. And I like Marita's point to Shubham. I think so. Yeah, penalties are after the harm and trust is built upstream, and I do agree. I think that's the case. It's a kind of a fine balance where if you have no enforcement, that becomes a problem. So you need to have some teeth, otherwise things don't change, unfortunately. But yeah, it shouldn't be the first resort to changing behavior. So look, I think we are almost coming to the end of this, and I really appreciate the the depth of conversations we've had. Allow the audience interaction, and since this will be available on demand for our audience to look up on LinkedIn later, I encourage you to continue engaging with this content, asking questions. Mick, I, and Branko will be monitoring the chat thread, so we will be adding in specific insights where you ask for them. So this is not just the end of it. That's why I like these live sessions more so than traditional webinar setup, because we can continue the discussion. But I think I'm just going to go to you, Branko and Mick, for your final comments on, as you think about the path forward. We've introduced 8 pillars. We've talked about the National AI Plan. We've tackled a few practical examples. What's the one thing you want to leave our audience away with as they can take something tangibly and apply to their organizations? If that's one advice you would give them, what would that be in 30 seconds or so? So I'll go to you first, Branko.
Gosh, I can go Mick first. 30 seconds to talk about one thing. Because I think, like this is the point, right? So what the key issues that enterprises worry about is what we spoke about, right? So, I think, how do we take away regulatory uncertainty? I don't know, right? So that's something that we can't solve as individuals, but we can certainly be a voice and get together with those advocacy groups that talk about, if you've got the ASA hat on, you talk about ASA and cyber, we've got to find those regulatory sort of guardrails to help guide AI in a responsible and trustworthy manner. But I think data comes back to data again, like cyber. So I think it's that data responsibility, data privacy, ensuring that you're transparent with that throughout the organization. And to me, making good judgment calls around this is a task that's really appropriate for AI. It's not high stakes. It's doing things that are going to improve efficiencies, help out, like coding's a classic, like, the amount of work that's not replacing coders. And Anthropic put that in questions as yet, but it certainly has made a lot of difference. And then there's other areas that you definitely need human in the loop. So I think there's sorts of those things there for me is the data privacy component, and then how to apply the models with the human in the loops versus fully autonomous. So yeah.
Thanks, Branko. Mick?
Yeah. So my reflection on this is what I see happening is that within organisations, generally speaking, there's an AI. Somebody at board levels nominated somebody and go, can you look at this AI stuff for us? If you're that person that's looking at that AI stuff outside and kind of outside of the rest of the organisation, do look at the 8 pillars. Look at the 8 pillars that we've presented there. See what you're doing in each of those 8 pillars. Have you got a response to that? Do you have it? How you if you've got a bit of a question mark, sort of go, well, how would I respond to those 8 pillars in terms of the AI discovery work I'm doing? How can AI impact me? How is it going to be useful? And just make sure that your 8 pillars, you kind of have a view of what you're doing to control and govern and understand the benefits of what you're doing. That'd be my last advice. So.
Well said there, Mick. And look, I'll just echo that. My simple advice to all of you again is to start with the first thing is go out, understand, build out your inventories. What are the key AI risk cases in your organization? Just get that AI use cases rather. Just figure that out. That's harder than it sounds. But the best way to do that is engage with, like, if you are on the stream, a lot of you might be working in security or technology. As with anything, I advise go and talk to your business peers because they'll be the ones to tell you how they're actually thinking about using it or using it. And that's going to be your first point of getting visibility. So with that, massive thanks again to Mick, Branko for joining us here, and to all the audience you're going to engage with us now and in the future. And this is not the end of the conversation. And we'll be doing more of these sessions, by the way. So we'll have the next one coming up in around 2 to 3 months, which will be a similar structure. But along the way, we'll be publishing more content and engaging with you on LinkedIn. So thank you again. Appreciate all the time.